Hey there, welcome to First Look, Lisa Tweardy Buckingham edition, because this coming week you will not hear from me, but you will be hearing from Lisa because we get a chance to hear her as a part of our Centennial Sermon Series. So Lisa Tweardy, who was the youth person, Christian ed person at Northmont, I think almost or around 20 years ago, believe it or not. It's been about that much time. Is going to be back, and I think the last time that we heard from her was about a year and a half ago when she preached in November. So we're excited to have her back, and I'm sorry to be missing that, but I will catch it on the recording. But just wanted to let you know that is what's going to be happening. And so what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm not even preaching on, which you've gotten used to me doing, just because I think it just gives you one additional angle and some things to be thinking about, because I don't know what direction she's going to go in. But if nothing else, you'll be a little bit more familiar with the passage as that happens. Next week, during the week, I will be on vacation. And so even though I will be preaching on the 10th, August 10th, there won't be First Look next week. And so you get the week off, and so you'll just have to, I don't know, go back to an old one or something like that. I'm sure you'll be fine for a week. So anyway, this week, what we have is we're back in Colossians. We were just there recently. I was preaching out of Colossians, not last week, but the week before. So kind of a return to a book, which is nice because it's a shorter book. And so now you get a chance to see two different passages from that same book, but now you're a little bit familiar with what's going on in that one. But I'll give you a little bit of a review. So the passage that we're looking at is Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. And her title is New Self. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the passage and then give you a little bit of a reminder about where we were in the book of Colossians. Okay, so here it is. So if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever is in you that is earthly, fornication or impurity or passion or evil desire and greed, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming on those who are disobedient. These are the ways that you are also once followed when you were living that way. But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have stripped off the old self with its practices and have clothed yourselves with the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of our Creator. In that renewal, there is no longer Greek and Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free, but Christ is all and in all. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to do was just to make sure I kind of reminded you of what type of book Colossians is. So I think I've been saying that there are three types of books that Paul writes. The first is one that is steeped in theology, one where it's kind of almost like a lesson, a class on here's how we study and understand God 101. Romans is a good example of that. The next kind of book is more of a like do this or don't do this, right? It's kind of a learn your lesson kind of a thing. So it's more based on, hey, I've heard that this is happening. Keep doing that. So an encouragement to keep doing that, or stop doing that, an encouragement to stop something. So it's taking one particular problem or one particular opportunity in that church or in those churches and either exploiting them, or squashing them, changing them. The third kind is more about encouragement and relationship. So you're going to see a lot of correspondence in the beginning and the end of the book. Say hello to them, say hello to them. These people are coming, please greet these people, etc. But also a lot of, hey, I just want to remind you, I just want to tell you, I want to connect with you. And so I want to say things and do things that are about connecting with you. And so this letter to the Colossians is a lot about that kind of third idea. So what you're going to find in this book is kind of a reminder, as the middle of the book kind of goes from some things to just kind of keep people up to date on. The middle of the book then talks a little bit about like things to remember, things that will hopefully encourage you, things that will hopefully kind of keep things up. Because remember, this is one of those books that Paul writes in isolation, right? So Paul is in prison and is writing this book as a way of connecting. And so before this chapter, I was just looking at it a second ago, before this chapter, in chapter 2, Paul is trying to remind people of, hey, there's a lot of false teachers out there. And you'd want to warn against that if you can't be with them, right? So you're feeling isolated. You're wanting to make sure that people, in the meantime, while you're gone, people aren't falling for false teachings. They're not getting caught in traps of other people who might influence them. This is what I want you to remember. So, kind of moving from the false teachings warning to this is what you have before you. This is what this new life looks like. Let me expound upon that. So a lot of Paul's writing talks about the idea of a new life in Christ, and kind of does that in a lot of different ways, but it's not isolated to this book. That Paul would talk about like the old things are done, the new things are here, and as a way of encouraging people to say, look, you have done things certainly. All of you have done things a certain way up until this point. It doesn't mean that you're going to. If you notice, it doesn't say you're going to stop doing your vocation. It doesn't say you're going to move from where you are. It doesn't say you're going to start living in this particular style. It doesn't say you have to stop, liking the music or liking the food or liking the entertainment or doing the work, being with the people that you are with. The core elements of your life don't change. That's not what this new life means. But it does mean that your approach to that life, right? This is like spiritual living. That's really an encouragement in spiritual living. That's the part that's going to change. So you can't say yes to this thing and then every way that you approach the world be the same. That's not what this looks like. Because in some faith traditions, people could tend to look at it like a philosophy towards, like that they incorporate into their daily actions, right? It's almost like a way of thinking through or dealing with or coming to terms with the things that happen in life. So when bad things happen, the philosophy might help you kind of work through how to handle that. Paul is saying that a life in Christ is different than that. That it has elements to it that you put away doing certain things, and he lists all those certain things. You stay away from those behaviors, and you adopt new behaviors. So it's like an extraction and an inclusion of different things, with the hope, of course, that will mean, or it will be a reflection of the way that you understand who Christ is in your life. And there's a reiteration of the fact that this isn't isolated to any one group of people. It's not isolated to any one background. That, whether, regardless of your ethnic background or your religious expression or your socioeconomic status, your legal status, any of those things, all of that isn't a factor in how this gets played out. That's the new life. And for some people, that of course would have been, comforting, that I don't have to change where I live, who I know, what I do, what I wear, what I eat, what I read. But the way that I do live day to day does need to adhere to this faith. So on one hand, it's an opportunity. Now, on the other hand, it's also I have to stop doing things that are harmful to me, and I need to start seeing them as harmful to me. My proclivities, my social interactions, my language, how I talk to other people, how I think about other people, that does need to change. There is a vested interest. I have to invest in this as much as we would say that Christ invested in me. There's a back and forth there. So it's the people who are adopting this who are thinking through, can I, live in this way? Not just can I accept this thing, can I intellectually absorb who Christ is, say yes to this reality. God is like this, salvation is like this. But can I also adhere to these practices of living my life in a way that is honoring of the God that I'm saying yes to? So there's the intellectual piece and the spiritual practice piece. And one of the things I think that you kind of recognize over time is that that's not something that you're giving up, but something that you are letting go of, that weighs you down, that distracts you from a life that's more free and less encumbered by the issues that come with all the things that all those practices sort of kind of point to. Now, not knowing exactly where Lisa will take it, here, I guess, is my initial perspective. I think that when we read a passage like this, I think we have a couple of different tendencies. We tend to kind of think about it as like this sort of rule book that Paul is trying to get the people to adhere to. That you need to stop these practices that are bad for you, that are bad for your community, that are bad for your family. They're not healthy, pure ways of living. That feels prudish, or that feels like it's really strict. That doesn't feel very free. That doesn't feel, that feels like I have to really toe the line. And with that, I think in any context I've ever been in, can also, it tends to come with some judgment, right? I mean, and that's the tough part, is that Paul is saying, act like this, don't act like this. But the hardest part about that is the way that we judge each other for how well we do that or not do that. So, for instance, let's say you're in a family system, or let's say you're in a neighbor, at some kind of community, or in a faith community. And there are people who are kind of the leaders or the authorities in that community or in that family. They might have taken upon themselves to make sure that you are adhering to that faith tradition, to those actions or lack of actions in the way that they see fit. So if they deem you not righteous enough or worthy enough or pure enough or whatever, then scorn, shame, exile, that you are now not accepted into the fold, so to speak. And obviously that there's been a lot of pain and a lot of just families and communities torn apart by that. We have done a lot of damage as people of faith by the ways that we judge other people's capacities for adhering to what we might call a Christian lifestyle. Well, you're not living this the way that I think that you should be living it, whether it's relationally or financially or through your language or through what you watch or read or what you do for a living, whatever it happens to be. And I'm the one who's going to judge you for that. And we've, of course, done that for centuries. And I think we've started to try to work through that as faith communities, where we recognize that I am not the gatekeeper of what it means to live out a Christian life. I don't set rules for you. And if you don't meet some standard, I'm not the one who, gives out some kind of punishment, whatever that could look like. But I think working out what it means to have grace for each other, grace for ourselves, and to look at why we do things rather than how well we do them. We take into consideration our intention rather than just, whether we're able to check off a bunch of boxes, I think is a big part of how that works itself out. And, obviously that's played out in the kind of laws we've made. It's played out in the kinds of communities that we build. It's, the way we teach our children, the lessons that we see in books or in movies or in television. All those things get played out in our culture. And each generation, if you notice, thinks that the generation that comes after them are worse at adhering to those rules than they were. And, I've read enough and looked at enough kind of commentary throughout the centuries even of how authorities within the church or parents or whatever see their children. And one of the classic examples that I can think of off the top of my head of that kind of, kids today aren't respectful the way that we were respectful. About 300 years ago, there was a big debate in the church about this new musical style that some churches were kind of adopting. And there were a lot of high-profile church leaders, people that were known, throughout Europe, throughout, the Western church world, who had really strong opinions on this new musical style that they were thinking of implementing in these churches. And a lot of people were against it because they thought, well, this is not the way we've done things. This is not the purest way of expressing our worship. This should never happen. You know, this is a style for children. This is awful, right? This new thing that churches are doing. Again, this is 300 years ago. This new thing that churches are doing is awful. Well, the thing they were talking about that some churches were starting to implement and use in worship was the pipe organ. Because the pipe organ was an instrument for carnivals or, outside merriment or, festivals or whatever. And so the idea of bringing this instrument into church was blasphemous. And today we think of that as the most, classic, always used formal, only the most formal churches have beautiful pipe organs. Times change, ideas change, generations move things, in a progressive kind of way. And we all kind of learn to adapt, but we always think that the generation that comes after us is doing it worse than we were or than our parents were. So again, I'm not quite sure exactly how Lisa is going to want to address the passage, but those are some of the thoughts I think to be latching on to as you think through this week. So just as a reminder, she'll be here this week. We have another preacher in September. It's Brian Wallace will be here in September. I'll be back on the 10th because we'll have communion on the 10th. But anyway, I'm glad to be able to get a chance to just chat with you about the scripture for a little bit. So I hope that you have a wonderful week. Again, I'll be gone, so I hope that all goes well. And I look forward to hearing Lisa and how she kind of addresses the passage. If you need anything, please let us know. And until I see you again, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time for another First Look. Take care.